Okay, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today for Live from the Studio with Osvaldo Castillo. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Griffin Art Projects is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations. We are honored and grateful to undertake our work here. My name is Fauna Ibarra, and I'm the Public Programs and Residency Coordinator here at Griffin Art Projects. A few housekeeping notes before we jump into today's presentation. If you would like to see live captions displayed on your screen, you can enable this by selecting the CC Live Transcription button at the bottom of your screen. Also, we are using Zoom webinars format today, which means that we cannot see or hear you. However, we will appreciate your comments and questions for the Q&A in the panel box below. During the Q&A, you'll also have an option to ask your question out loud. If that's your preference, feel free to raise your virtual hand using the button at the bottom of your screen. Today's presentation is being recorded, so if you ask your question out loud, your voice will be captured on audio recording. So great. So today we will be hearing from Osvaldo's practice and the work he undertook at Griffin Art Projects. Originally from El Salvador, Osvaldo Ramirez Castillo's areas of research and art production are concerned with issues of collective memory, historical trauma, migration, and identity explored through multimedia approaches to drawing, which involve printmaking, stop-motion, animation, and installation work. His art process is an intuitive construction of memory as a form of personal myth-making that casts political expression, voices modes of resistance, and most recently, speaks to a process of reconciliation, repair, and healing. He has exhibited extensively across Canada and internationally, attended art residencies, and received multiple awards, grants, and fellowships from the Canada Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, the Paulo Krasner Foundation, and the Santa Fe Institute, among others. A former resident of Montreal, he lives in Vancouver, where he currently teaches at Emily Carr University. Take it away, Osvaldo.
Thank you, Fauna, for the lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm gonna give you just a small presentation on my work, maybe about 30 minutes, and then we'll move on to the work that I've been producing here out of the Griffin Art Projects. Very grateful to be here in North Van, coming over here whenever I can. I was telling the crew that I've been so busy with so many things between teaching, and just this past week I moved to a new location. So the entire week was all about just packing my stuff, packing our things, and moving to East Van again. And between that and teaching and the responsibilities around that, it's already a lot. But I'm glad to be here today. I'm going to share my screen right now to begin with. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay. Thanks, Fauna. Thank you, Fauna. Okay, so my story begins with my relationship to tragedy by addressing issues of collective memory and personal trauma. I'm originally from El Salvador. I left my place of birth at the age of 11 as a result of the 12-year civil war in the 1980s, right up to 1992. So my work is largely informed by the impact of violence and the legacy of the Salvadoran Civil War. I grew up in Toronto, partly grew up in Toronto. I remember just learning about the armed conflict in a book of photojournalism. And this is where I came across a picture of a pile of shoes dumped in the middle of downtown San Salvador. And these were stories. Some of these stories were also shared to me through family history. So a lot of my work deals with intergenerational knowledge of the war and the stories that come out of that. And going back to the work I did, like, I don't know, 2007, I believe. This is the time when I was really influenced by Western style of image making, I suppose. So I was very influenced by the styles of Albert Dürer, Hieronymus Bosch, and Goya. My chosen medium for storytelling has mainly been drawing. I like merging a range of aesthetic, cultural, and political motifs or references to speak about the history of personal and shared trauma expressed through the human body. I've been really, when I began drawing, I was really into the history of the ancient print engravings, like in the style of those artists that I mentioned earlier. And because I guess I specialized in printmaking as a student, so I've had the background of that tradition. Also, the Latin American tradition of just political prints, revolutionary prints from the 80s. They have played a big influence in my work too. I'm obsessed with specific imagery, like the State Army soldier that you see here. Continues to be an iconic image that has persisted in my imagination over time. It has been revisited, recreated, like remaked or just recycled over time differently based on how I process ideas, feelings, reflections on what memory work looks like. The last 3 slides that I've shown you, I guess, it just shows, an imaginary space with groups of limbless soldiers with crazed looks on their faces. And at the time, I was just processing the subject of violence as a form of spectacle, treated as entertainment or a freak show to have fun with. Sadly enough, these things actually did happen. Those types of crimes did occur. These were actual events that took place during the Civil War. Most of the crimes were committed by the military. I would say anywhere between 90% to 98% of the crimes, but because it's a civil war, you have the guerrilla faction fighting the state military, and they also committed their own share of crimes within their own groups. I'm not going to get into the background of the Civil War too much. I like to focus on the expression of the work. That's just showing you a detailed image of that much larger work. My pieces range between small to medium to large. This one, for example, is maybe about 6 feet by 6.5 feet. So my drawings, they range in scale, right? I also think that my work displays a hybrid aesthetic. As a working artist, anything that's related to my experience living in the diaspora gave me creative context for the intuitive construction of memory and how that changes over time. So researching our cultural memory and practices and tapping into my personal experience growing up in 2 worlds, I became motivated to explore the connections between pre-Hispanic mythology, Catholic iconographies, in relation to Salvadoran popular folklore and aspects of contemporary tattoo and graffiti culture. If you guys have any questions on the chat, please write them down along the way. That would be great. If we can have a conversation along the way too. So as you I also focus my attention on certain characters in our history. Like the image of the marero, or a gang member. These are tattooed beings that make a living from extortion, kidnapping, drug trafficking, and murder. And they are a byproduct of the Civil War, and are much, they're much reviled and met with hatred in Salvadoran society. So in here, I'm like subverting the image of the tattooed gang member who leads a life of violence into a religion, into a religious icon or a patron saint. And I like to also explore, Christian devotion culture, and the different manifestations of how that is expressed in the public realm through religious holidays, celebrations. Like this one, for example, I'm sourcing elements found in pre-Hispanic cultures too. And here I'm referencing the ancient folk religion of the Nahual. Nahual is the belief of that a person who has an animal counterpart, to which their life force is linked to. And when I do my research, I don't do this like deep dive into it. These are like popular art expressions that I grew up with, and a lot of it is linked to our indigenous heritage, which is part of our living memory, right? So if I go back here, like I'm mixing the animal mask of the Jaguar, or forgot the ancient, the Nahuatl name is Tepeyolot. Is basically a jaguar it acts as a link between earth and the underworld. And there are many myths and many mythologies around this god or deity that have played out in the religion of the peoples of the Americas. So I'm mixing like basically the state army uniforms from the 1980s with a jaguar mask, and I guess the red star of the Cold War communist years. So I'm mixing all of these different life experiences into my work, like mixing up, Mesoamerican deities like the serpent deity of Quetzalcoatl with a family of gang members being birthed out of its mouth, for example, things like that. And people often ask me about the meaning of certain symbols that appear in my work, like loudspeakers. They have had a personal and political significance growing up back home. Like, for example, loudspeakers were used in protests, rallies, funeral announcements. Street vendors use them, and for example, it also has a very personal meaning for me, like my grandfather's death, who was basically murdered by death squads during the Civil War. His death was being announced repeatedly over these like loudspeakers atop this long pole overlooking the small town that we partly grew up in. So during his vigil night, his obituary was being announced over these loudspeakers, and that had an impact in my memory as a child, right? I can only allude to the meaning by its many interpretations of how I remembered it being used, if that makes any sense. And dogs do appear in my work. That I couldn't tell you why. I think they kind of, the expression of the scrappy nature of a street dog of the Americas, it's something that I grew up with, and there's something fierce about them, that they show some sort of like resilience about them. They're street dogs, and yeah, there's something about them, about their image, that I like. So if anything, my work is really, it's in the expression of it, like the personal symbology of my life experience that mixes in, that blends, street culture, pop culture, blending, I don't know, mixing in contemporary tattoos with Mesoamerican deities. yeah, just using the human body as a site for trauma, right? These are all things that I like to talk about in my work. And so the act of remembering personal experiences or reviving collective memory feels like inventing new stories, almost like personal myth making by way of recycling stories and making new connections again. And all the hybrid subjects are basically, I would say, are like a response to the desperate fragmented memories and imageries and events that make up my personal history. And here I've been just exploring the iconic soldier again, reimagining it. And these works are, just to give you background on these works, they are mixed media drawings on Mylar. There is drawn collage in here. At times there are print techniques employed, some relief work. I will fill you in on my studio process later on, so you can see the kind of layering that I do using Mylar, frosted Mylar. And so I've been influenced by illustration, art, and design, or print work. In particular, I'm thinking of the revolutionary Latin American print posters too. And also this past few years, I would say anywhere between 5-6 years, I've been I've been processing a language for reconciliation and or healing, and what that would look like in my practice, right? So I started with a series of dismembered torsos supported by sticks or branches, and they display signs of growth, regeneration, restoration through plant life or flowers coming out of their bodies. I don't know how I came up with these images. It just makes sense for me over time. When you just kind of go back to the work that I've done in the past, it's always a good idea to revisit it so you can make new connections again. And the newest, I guess, exploration for me has been, looking for a language for what reconciliation looks like, what this idea of repair, right? And recovery, I would say. I source the internet for pics, art magazines, newspapers, newspaper clippings, secondhand stories from family members, of course. Some of it is visuals, some is via story or oral storytelling and texts. All of that informs my work. These standing figures with sticks on them, I don't know, they just seem like standing scarecrows or monuments that have survived a catastrophe. Or sometimes I see them as ruins that point to a process of healing through natural overgrowth. And so again, like going back to where I grew up, the kind of storytelling I grew up with manifests a type of syncretism that has played out over centuries in the Americas, right? I'm talking about the mixing of Roman Catholic religion, indigenous motifs and iconographies, and their cosmovision, our cosmovision, which is largely expressed in our popular folklore and communal traditions. I'm thinking, for example, things like ex votos, folk art, Day of the Dead traditions, popular patron saint celebrations in Central America. And some of these, include popular street dances or performances, and saint devotion culture displaying elements of kitsch art, folk art, local folk art. This is again a piece, a detail of the much larger piece that you see here. This last, I would say, 3-4 pieces. The last 5-6 pieces I'm showing you right now were displayed at the VAG not too long ago, as part of a show called Stories That Animate Us, curated by Zoe Chan. So I have 3 figures in procession, walking towards a structure in decay or in a state of collapse, bringing offerings to it. At least, you know, that's the story I have made up in my head, right? The viewer is very much encouraged to bring in their own interpretations. You're encouraged to bring your own readings, of course, and perceptions to it. So again, I've been working with the concept of ruins or scenes of destruction, juxtaposed with vegetation, flowers, and just using like a variety, you know, of plant life coming through the rubble to project ideas of repair or renewal, or you know, or what healing would look like in a landscape. This is more or less what my work looks like in scale inside a gallery space. This is a shot from way back in 2008 at a Centre Clark in Montreal. This is an installation that I did back in Montreal in 2012. I did basically it was a 2-person show with artist Marigold Santos. I created a garden enclosed by a chain link fence with a barbed wire on top around the perimeter, which you can't really see here too much of, but it was approximately 15 by 15 feet. I arranged materials such as twigs, flowers, moss, soil accordingly. And at its center, of course, I have the shoes that I showed at the beginning emerging from the ground up, as if they have been recently, you know, exhumed or excavated. This is a sand drawing that I did not too long ago. Basically, I used sawdust and textile dye, and just reworking the image of the gang member again. Again, I'm also referencing, you know, how these street tapestries are used inside the context of religious celebrations, especially during Easter and other patron devotion saint celebrations that happen in small towns in Central America. And so I'm just kind of like using that idea to come up with my own imagery, my own symbology, right? Again, the marero or gang member is shown as a patron saint. And in the back there, you see a small, like an installation that I did in that nook of the gallery back in 2020 at ArtSite in Windsor, Ontario. That was in 2020, I believe. And so, you know, there's an aspect of just recycling, reimagining, just remaking imagery, guided by my topics of concern. And yeah, so that's what I have. I hope I didn't take too long there, but I have done some, you know, animation work too, but it's not in this presentation. But if you go to my website, you'll see some there. I intend to go back to doing more animation as well, which is composed of, you know, cutouts, collage, and like assemblage work, similar to the kind of drawing that I'm doing now. For the kind of drawing that I've been doing in the past, like, I don't know, 8 years now, just drawing, cutting, and recollaging pieces of work, cutting out certain characters and just rearranging them along the paper surface to see what works best for me. That's usually how I work with my compositions, just cutting stuff out and playing with the arrangement of them and using both sides of the paper. And that's partly due to my influence in printmaking. I sometimes think in terms of layers or layering to see how the colors would play out together, right? When you mix them up. Anyway, that's my presentation. Thank you. I see there's a question here. No, there isn't. Oh, there is. Hi, Connor. Thank you for being here, Connor. I appreciate it. Connor's asking, what are your thoughts on the importance of the artist as proponent for political change? That's a very good question, because I grew up in a very politicized environment, and that's obviously influenced my work. For political change, I think you can just It's a tricky question, because the way I think about answering that question is that when you incorporate art into politics, you have the danger of reducing the image into a political slogan. You can reduce it down to just propaganda, basically, instead of making it into political artwork, right? So I would say that make your work as personal as you can. If you touch upon like social political issues in your work, make it as personal as possible, and the work will come out as honest as possible, right? People will definitely see the social commentary, the political undertones, but it does not make it, it's not reduced down to like what I said before, a slogan or propaganda. It becomes your own voice, your own political commentary, as honest as possible. Does that answer your question? Anyway, can anyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. And maybe on that same realm, I have a question for you as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you were talking about how you use the intergenerational knowledge of the war in your work to create storytelling. And I was wondering if this is a collaborative process with your family and friends or acquaintances, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, the way I approach that is just by having conversations with them. It's not necessarily like a formal process of interviewing them. It just kind of happens, which is quite interesting, because I've been thinking about how to make a work out of that, right? Because believe it or not, it's happened so many times where when we speak about the past, it's often like in social situations around the dinner table. And so I'm like, why do these topics come out then? Well, obviously, you're enjoying yourself, you're as a group, as a family, surrounded by food and good times. But eventually, every now and then, the topic of the war comes out, but it doesn't take over into this like dark, heavy, somber tone. It just becomes like as a matter of fact kind of conversation. And there's something to say about why that happens, and in the context of where it happens too. And so it'll be interesting to make a piece around that. Something that displays that experience as intergenerationally as a family unit. It'll be interesting to like explore that. And I have ideas in my head on how to go about doing that. But again, there are so many projects that don't become fully realized. They just kind of float around in your head. You carry those ideas in your head for a long time until it's time to execute it. That's usually how it happens. But life gets in the way, and it's time to, it's hard to execute, to realize all your projects that you have in your head when there's only so much time. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, it does make sense. And we have another question here, and it asks, can you talk a little bit about what you're focusing on during your residency at Griffin?
Okay, yes. I was telling the Griffin cohort, Emmett, Lisa, and Fauna, that I was moving this past week. I was in the middle of packing, and just yesterday we moved to a new location, and this entire past week, I didn't have time to make it up here to the residency. But over the past 3 weeks before the move, I was coming here, and I do have some stuff to show you. But I don't know how to point the screen to this. I'll try my best. 1 second. I have this is the table that I'm working on. And I have I don't know if you guys can see that.
Maybe if you can stop sharing your screen so we can see it bigger, that would be perfect.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Totally forgot.
There you go. And you're spotlighted. Go ahead.
Oh, I can see Colin's, I'm sorry, Connor's, you have answered the question 110%. Thank you, Connor, very kind of you. Was not able to see the chat before, but now I see it. This is something I've been working on so far. So what I work with is transparent. It's this transparency that's really great to work on both sides with. And what I usually do is I just overlay this wherever I want this figure to go, or it can go under this paper. Usually I work in layers. So I have this other sheet here, like, you know, pieces, like bits and pieces of wash that I put on top of the landscape or behind it. Basically, everything is done on a sheet of frosted mylar, right? And then I just paint the back to make it opaque, so it reveals itself on this side more, so I can then collage it on top of the drawing that I'm doing here. Okay. And here, this is basically the jaguar deity that I'm gonna integrate into this landscape. So again, I have, you know, plant life, like coming through the rubble. This is probably about like 5 feet long and very much work in progress, but I'm gonna like integrate other figures, like iconic figures that are, you know, representative of like our ancient past and contemporary reality. Again, this is like an image of a gang member. I still haven't drawn the tattoo on his back, but this is on a separate piece of mylar that I'm going to integrate on that much larger piece. And I have other works in progress here. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we see it.
So I work with ink, acrylic ink, watercolor, colored crayons, you know, anything that stains the paper. I recently found this really cool toner wash technique that I learned at school that printmakers use for plate lithography, and I'm gonna use some of that for this too. You know, anything that stains the paper that creates some sort of like a blending or layering, like coffee works really well too. Let's see here. One second. I have all this work, you know, overlaid on top of one another. So Give me a minute, guys. 1 second here.
While we wait, folks, feel free to type in any other questions that you have in the Q&A panel box, and we'll be happy to read them.
Sorry, Fauna?
Oh, I was just telling attendees that they can type in their questions.
Yeah. So the work that I have on this table, right? They look like scraps and bits of things, but this is like stuff that I'm reworking. It's actually the stuff that I have on this table over to my right here is all is basically work from maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago that I want to remake, like redo, because there were things that I didn't like about it that I want to change again. And so it really, becomes about, saving your work, not throwing them away if you don't like something, and just recycle it so you can reuse it later. Sorry, Fauna, you were saying something about questions?
Yeah, we have 2 questions. Well, one comment and one question. One comment is the grayscale really makes the colors jump off the page.
Mhm.
And a question from Shura. She says, "Hi Osvaldo, how do you choose your colors? Is there any symbolism there?"
Is that Shura?
Yeah,
My neighbor? Hi,
your
Shura.
studio mate.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? Shura, sorry, Fauna.
Yep, the question is, how do you choose your colors? Is there any symbolism there?
They just happen. That's my straight up answer, but I know there's more there, I mean, I grew up in the tropics, like intense, bright colors, contrasting colors, but it's also, how those colors are used back home too, whether it's in advertising, our ancient past, which is a living memory, like how, what's the word? Basically the syncretic, regalia that's used in celebrations, how those colors are used, the very pop colors, are worn in these like, religious festivities, right? And they just sort of happened just the centuries of two cultures mixing and blending, yeah, like for example, the sawdust tapestries that are shown in the streets, they're like, it's a colonial tradition that people have kind of like subverted in their own way without knowing that they're throwing their own, indigenous, influence on there too. They really made it their own. So I mean, all of this influences in the way of a color palette, it's something that I grew up with. So it just makes sense for me to use like very elemental, earthly colors, but also contrasting, intense colors. Like I love the contrast between red and black and green, for instance. Yeah. I hope that I've answered your question, Ashura. I'll see you soon.
We have 2 more interesting questions here. So the first one is from Anne Marshall. You can see it too, but I'll read it out loud. It says, your historical references to masks makes me think of BC indigenous masks. Is there any connection to rituals in the 2 cultures, or is it only coincidence?
Can you repeat the last piece? Is there a connection
to rituals in the 2 cultures, or is it only coincidence?
No, it's no coincidence. I think, the centuries of syncretism, that cultural mix is no coincidence. Like some of these street dances, especially like in places like in Guatemala, you will see they're very political. Like the origin of the story being played out in dances, street dances, is very political. I mean, some of them were done so that their story can survive, so that their story could survive under, Spanish colonization, right? And so, and because a lot of indigenous languages and way of life was being suppressed, and the Spanish came to reform people into Christianity, to submit them into Christianity. Many people wanted to. Many indigenous peoples created these, like, subversive dances that became popularized over time, and they became acceptable as a thing to celebrate with. So I find that interesting. So it's not a coincidence. It's more like, for me, it's like a way of survival, but yes, it does show a strong influence of, Roman Catholicism, because that's what we became, devout Catholics, although again, talk about in the indigeneity. It's like, I'm not an indigenous person, but we come from indigenous descendants. We all are that mix. And so there are many groups, especially in El Salvador, reviving one of the native languages that was almost gone. It was suppressed for a long time, and the few Nahuatl, that's the language name, Nahuatl speakers are reviving it, are resalvaging it, and it's becoming part of the collective consciousness more. So I'm very glad about that. It's part of our history, who we are. I see that Lou is here as well. Thank you, Lou, for being here. Can I just read what she says?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Is the recycling of your past works a way of layering memories, or carrying them around, a way of making sure your experiences of El Salvador maintain a place here in your Canadian life? Yeah, I would say yes. Everything that I'm referencing is linked to home, or home as I see it today. But yeah, that's a good point, actually. All that layering just kind of happens subconsciously, and yeah, that's what I can say about that. But it's almost like I'm carrying this, yeah, what Lou says, like, fragmentary aspects of my experiences, and carrying them, like, in my life in the diaspora, in the Canadian diaspora. Oh, Anne Marshall Webb. Hi, Anne. I've met you at, I think, yeah, you guys came to my studio. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to read what Anne Marshall says. Your historical references to masks makes me think of BC indigenous masks. Is there any connection to rituals in the two cultures, or is it only coincidence? Oh, is that something that Fauna you mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've gone through it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if there's a connection between, honestly, the Pacific Northwest cultures to the Central American cultures. I'm not sure. That's a good question, though. You have to do, like, some real historical, anthropological digging there. But I don't know. I just know that what all indigenous cultures have in similar is their connection to the land. It's part of their religion, right? Land and religion is important to the indigenous peoples, and how different spirits and the spirit of the lake, of the mountain, of a certain animal, how those forms of life, I would say, are deified, right? And the ceremonies around it. But I wouldn't really know what the connections are between the ceremonies of two regionally distinct cultures, one in the Pacific Northwest and the ones in the Mesoamerica. So it's a good question. I don't know.
And you, in your work, you speak to a process of reconciliation and healing. So I was wondering, like, what are your most recent language findings in terms of reconciliation?
Language?
Yeah, you say you're looking for a language.
Oh, okay.
reconciliation. So
Well, the way I've been bringing in plant life, you know, the idea of like bringing beauty, you know, into the world with plant life and just decorating the landscape with it. You know, I may be doing, you know, like a series of rubble landscapes, or the idea of ruins, you know, come to mind. You know, I that's what I've been getting into lately. But you know, just having aspects of like plant life or overgrowth coming through the rubble. Uh, to me, that's like to me that just kind of points to, just indicates to healing. You know, something I'm striving for, something that I want to manifest. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
no, it does. Thank you. We can wait for more questions from the audience. Or if you have anything to share, Osvaldo, please feel free to.
Yeah, actually, there's one more thing. So 1 second. Talk about you know, ruins, or destroyed, you know, dilapidated buildings. I'm also practically just starting to destroy the paper too. And I've been burning mylar so I can overlay them and create an installation on the wall. That's one of the projects I wanted to do here at the Griffin, and I do have time still to, you know, keep burning more mylar, and just create the shape of an animal with it. Thinking the deity Quetzalcoatl, which is the plumed serpent, and just pin these pieces of burned mylar on top of, and just overlay them on top of one another in the shape of the body of a snake, and go from there and see what that would look like. So it'll be like a paper installation of sorts in the shape of a deity, of an animal deity, and just pin them to the wall, and yeah, and go from there. I'm currently exploring this idea, and I am going to go ahead with it for a show that I have coming up in May. And you see that? So I have literally started to destroy the paper, and and possibly also use like corn husks. You know, one of the staple foods in the Americas. One of the major, you know, plants that was deified in the peoples of the Americas too, as a in the form of a deity, right? It's part of the creation stories, one of the pantheon creation stories in the Americas. You know, corn. It is thought to believe that, you know, humanity was made out of corn. So I'm thinking of using corn husks that I brought back from New Mexico, actually, not from back home, but I mean, there's a large Latino population in New Mexico, and I was there 4 years ago, and I brought some, like, you know, yeah, corn husks, preserved corn husks, and I'm gonna overlay that with this too, like bits and pieces of them, and just see how that would look like underneath or maybe on top. I'm not sure. So the whole idea is to create like a body of a snake, like yeah, just rethinking, just kind of recontextualizing the, you know, a deity through just different materials. Yeah, but burned paper, destroying the paper now, and see. Yeah.
Thank you. There's one last question from Connor. It says, do you implement dreams of conscious imagery into your work?
Stream of conscious imagery into my work. I think, you know what, somewhat earlier there was some of that. I remember back in 2007, I had just left my MFA, just finished my MFA, and I was sick, really sick of printmaking. I got sick of printmaking. So I left it behind and went back to the drawing board. Literally, I just started drawing and I told myself, just let it go. Just, you know, whatever comes out will come out, and let it go. And what came out was the work that I showed you earlier, the earlier pieces, you know, the Albert Dürer, you know, Peter Bruegel, the elder kind of, you know, style of drawing with lots of color in the background and figures mixing with one another. That's really what came out. That was more like a stream of consciousness kind of drawing back in 2008, 2009. Well, as early as 2007, 2008, 2009. And then I think my work became more research-based too. I started looking at photos from the Civil War, you know, the state army uniform, that kind of stuff. But I would say that I went through that phase of kind of like whatever comes out in whatever way. But I mean, I would love to go back to that. I mean, drawing is interesting in that over the years, you know, like you get so entrenched in one way of doing things, and when you want to try something else, it feels like you're starting anew, and it's like you almost forget. Like I forgot how to draw that way now. You know, I tell myself I forgot how to draw the way I was drawing like 15 years ago, you know, 12 years ago, and it's interesting, like, would I be able to go back to draw in a stream consciousness sort of way more? I don't know. I can tell you that it'll be difficult because, yeah, you know, your drawing is just interesting that way. Yeah. It's almost like you have to relearn what you did years ago, or relearn something new, or relearn something again when you've taken a break from it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. We also have one comment from you, Chan. If you want to read it, or I can read it.
Okay, I'll read it. Thanks, Fauna. Lou says, burning the paper as a form of healing, reconciliation, and reinvention to new way of reimagining a deity makes sense for another direction in your work. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you, Lou. Lou is my colleague in one of the classes I'm teaching right now, Emily Carr. So I'm very grateful for your wisdom and your leadership in our class together, Lou. Thank you for that comment. Much appreciated. But that's interesting. Burning as a form of healing. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. Huh. But you just planted an idea there for sure. Yeah, thank you. And Dorothy Doherty says, love your presentation, such interesting work. Thank you. Thank you.
We still have time for questions. If anyone else has questions, feel free to type it in the Q&A panel. And we will be reading it out loud.
So I've had to like walk out of the Griffin space to burn these outside because I don't want to set off the sprinklers. So
I was going to ask you, where have you been doing that?
Well, just on the side of the building whenever I had chance to. I haven't had much chance of doing that, but you know, now that things have cleared up for me a little more in terms of my schedule, I'm gonna start doing more of this. Take a break from drawing and start burning stuff, and hopefully not look like a weirdo next to the building just burning shit. 1 second. So the whole idea is to just overlay colors to, like, imagine this on a wall and just overlaying it with color and just kind of like, you know, puzzling together the shape of a snake. I don't know. And then I don't know, throw other materials in there that I'm interested in using, like string, string and needle, perhaps. I don't know.
What other kind of materials have you been using in your work?
Other than print-based materials, just like drawing stuff, but I'm interested in like thread and needle too, to maybe incorporate some of that in this kind of work. I mean, it'll be highly experimental, but the context is to, you know, make the shape of an animal, right? Like an ancient deity that's persisted over time, and see what I come up with. String and needle as a way of drawing too, right? This context, we'll see what that will look like.
We have a comment here. It says,
Oh, yeah.
I like the idea of burning as it takes on its own life as well.
Yeah, okay, so that's a very good point. Thank you, Julie. Like, I mean, I love the organic shapes that happen when you burn mylar, right? Similar to the organic shapes in nature or like plant life, you know, yeah, it has an intuitive sense. But anyway, I'm trying to make my work as intuitive as possible, without paying too much emphasis on, you know, research stuff. I mean, research is important when it comes to, you know the themes that you're putting your that you're contextualizing your work with, right? But doing the deep dive thing it would be too much for me. I don't want to get lost in the academic research. So even my research is fairly intuitive too. But yeah. Just one last look, I guess. Yeah.
Perfect. Just one last chance for questions. And while that happens, I'll ask you, you said you have a show coming up in May?
Yes. It's in Buffalo, New York. It's an artist-run center called Hall Walls, and it's happening in May, and I'm freaking out a little bit because I've been so incredibly busy with you know, life. Other things take over, like moving.
Yeah.
But teaching has been so much fun, actually. But it's also very time consuming. But yeah.
Are we able to see this new work in your website?
These, no,
Not yet. Okay.
Maybe in the next 6-8 months you will, when they're up on the wall, in the exhibition space in May. But right now, I just have to. I'm gonna try my best to come to the residency at Griffin like every day, almost every day, and yeah. I'm just looking forward to my schedule clearing up a little more, so I can dedicate more time to, you know, doing work at the Griffin. Yeah.
Well, Shane, there's no questions. Oh no, there's a comment here. Thank you for sharing your work, Osvaldo. It's much needed. Rarely artists mention intuition as process.
Thank you, Lou. Appreciate it. And thank you for being here, you guys, Connor, Lou, everybody else, of course. My neighbor, Shura. You're next.
She's next.
Anyway, not to put her on the spot. It's all good. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for coming for today's event. We hope to see you for sure as live from the studio next week, happening at the same time. Yeah, yeah, I'm dropping the link for the registration now. As well, we currently have an exhibition per diem, the Grid Network collection. We're open Friday to Sunday from 12 to 5 p.m. Thank you so much, Osvaldo.
No problem. One more thing. You guys are welcome to come and visit me, by the way. Just connect with me and I'll open the doors and come and visit me. Make it all the way out here if you can. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.